I think we'll get started. Welcome on a Wednesday afternoon. This is a session about search and BA Insight. My name's Jeff Fried.
And I'm Mike Himmelstein.
Mike and I were separated at birth, even though he might not admit it, because being associated with someone so hairless is always embarrassing. But we're both really passionate about search. We've worked a lot in the field, and fate brought us to BA Insight, which for me is really the best place on the planet to work on search and search-driven applications. A quick show of hands. How many people here are running search in SharePoint, 2010 or 2013? Everybody. How many are 2013? And how many are BA Insight customers currently? Great. So if you're not and you want to meet, there's quite a number of customers here. So you'll be able to hear firsthand from their experiences. In this session, we're going to talk about BA Insight, technology, but most importantly about how to be successful with search and search-driven applications. BA Insight, where both Mike and I work, is a software company whose focus is helping organizations to be successful with search, to implement these patterns that we're going to be talking about in a way that's faster, less expensive, much less risky, because as you'll see, search is sometimes a tricky thing to really pull off, and also a better experience. And we've worked with hundreds of organizations, lots of successful implementations. That's helped us gain both experience that we'll be talking about and also bake that into software. In this session, we're going to start simply with an overview of how we see search and our experience in what makes it hard and what the paradigm is today, and then take you through patterns with an example, a customer for each pattern, show you what the challenge was, how they became successful, and where in our software, which is the knowledge integration platform, that the capabilities came from. And then if there's time at the end, we'll play one of my favorite games, which is Stump the Chumps. If you can ask questions that really stump us, I think you've got people here that are willing to go as deep as you want in search and BA Insight. Okay? I'll start out with really a landscape. Who here feels like their search deployment is, who here who's not a BA Insight customer feels like their search deployment is really successful, everything it could be? Okay. The state of the industry today is, to me, quite sad, because there's incredible power. Everybody here owns a very good search core, a search engine, yet way too often we visit places and they say, search sucks. It's broken. And at a high level, the overall industry is kind of broken. We see time and time again what we call the search immaturity model. That people embark upon a program or a project to get a great experience within their organization. And they start by saying, well, let me pick a technology. I'm going to choose a new search engine, go out through really a purchasing project and deployment, and then get going, and then find it's not everything they might like. The first step is to index more, because the top problem if you can't find something is that it's not indexed. So clearly, you should add more content. And let's put all of the content in there, only to find that that's not right. In fact, the number 2 problem in search quality is that you've indexed too much, is there's too much garbage. So a sledgehammer doesn't do the job. It's really about picking the right content. But once you're in that state, now you've got a lot of content in one index, still not working. Well, maybe we should go back and look at what people are looking for, how they're searching. Let's get user feedback. And the request that the feedback that comes back is search sucks. And it's like saying, I've got a headache. There's a symptom without a cause, which leads to attempts to tune relevancy, ask users to tag things, to add metadata, to do programs. I visited a customer that had 7 people full-time doing nothing but twiddling the knobs in relevancy and still not getting there. So what do you do now? Go through root cause analysis, work through often a stressful time for the people who are in IT running the system and the people who are using it or sponsoring it, and ultimately determine, well, the problem is the search engine, so let's go get another one, go through another pattern. And this is pretty well known. This has been going on for quite a while in the industry. Average time to go through this cycle is about 3 years. We did a survey 6 months ago, and 56% of organizations own more than 4 search engines. The problem here isn't a technology problem. You own a perfectly good search engine. The problem is applying it successfully, having successful patterns, and having all the ingredients you need. And one of the phenomena is that search is really poorly understood. Everyone is familiar with search from a consumer experience from using Google. Almost no one understands how the algorithms within the search engine work. And you don't need to. But the point is that expecting to walk up, plug in search, and have it just work is unrealistic. And from this underestimation, which often comes from a lens of looking at things, I often hear, how many people here have heard someone say, I just want Google for my enterprise? Okay, come talk to us afterwards, because it's not realistic nor an appropriate goal. And we can help you get through that paradigm in your organization to something that's successful. That's probably the number one mindset that leads people into these traps. So this is all going on. It has for quite a while, but at the same time, the problem is getting bigger. As content explodes, as organizations have more diversity, volume, velocity of content, the number of organizations that say they're getting out of control and it's impacting their decision-making and their strategy, as well as being sort of an annoyance, it's getting to be a more and more serious problem. And therefore, viewing these projects much more strategically and looking at these patterns of success is important. Because when you get it right, search can be really great and really transformative. This is an example screenshot of a project at Ace Hardware, and we'll show you in a minute. It's an approach that leads to really successful projects. And that's one of the patterns that I think we're going to talk about.
Great. So when I think about patterns, I really think about this, is the pattern that ACE really falls under is replacing a legacy search system. Now, ACE is, for a lack of a better word, ACE is really your local hardware store. They have locations in 50 U.S. states. They're located in 60 countries. They're all around the globe. But the challenge around them is they're really based upon being and really owned as owner franchise pieces. So the owner franchise pieces means that there's an owner of that store, and that owner has the relationship for dealing with the company itself.
You know, I didn't realize that when we first started working with ACE, that they are a big organization, nationwide name, but it's actually a collection of many different stores. Therefore, they don't have the kind of control you might have if everyone is an employee, and the kind of experience you need to deliver to a store owner is that much more important. And that's really one of the motivations that led them to start working with us.
Yeah, and the real challenge with ACE has been when we were first approached by ACE, their challenge was really very simple. They said, we want to enable a brand new search experience, but the challenge is we don't really understand what that could be.
You know what I remember? I remember you walking in and telling them, no, don't do anything, not yet.
Not yet.
They were trapped in this same search and maturity cycle and about to switch search engines into SharePoint 2010. And the main issue was just changing the search engine doesn't get you there.
Not even close. And more importantly, the biggest challenge around them was that when they looked at SharePoint 2010, they saw XSLT, they saw all these really difficult and hard to use technologies about it. And I told them, no way, just please sit there and wait. Because the real challenge, the real power was that if they could wait for SharePoint 2013, they can have an amazing, amazing experience.
Yeah, and what they were working with previously was this. So there were 4,500 stores. I go in to buy a hammer. The guy across the counter is looking for inventory, looking to find what's the right help for me. And they're using this system, which is a good search core. This is based upon Endeca, very, very strong fundamentals. But from a user experience perspective, this sucks. It's like the 1970s. You're looking up on a blue screen, and you have to read all this text, and they were avoiding using the system, therefore not knowing what they had in stock, therefore not cross-merchandising. The after experience looks like this. And it uses great technology. It uses SharePoint 2013. It uses BA Insight. But the key element is also this approach of looking at it more holistically. So let me show you sort of what it looks like. I'm going to go into ACE, and you start really with a web kind of experience. These things are type ahead, so I can create an easy experience. I'm looking for a cordless drill, and I can go down and see elements in this grid view. Right? Each grid is an element that I found in the search result that's pretty natural to people. People are used to shopping on the web now and seeing this comparison, but it might be better to use a list view. And that control going back and forth is really quite seamless. One of the things that helps them say, well, what's the most important? I can select in here, I'm looking for not just cordless drill and bits. I'm going to get, I already have plenty of drill bits. So I've gotten down into a smaller selection. I can see on the right what's in stock, what's not, manufacturers, and well, I'm going to pick really a brand. So I've gotten through this exploration. I can pick multiple brands. I can get into all of this metadata that comes with a product catalog, and then sort it. In this case, I'm looking for, let me see if I can start with the most expensive drill, and that would be a good recommendation. What's a good fit? And that gives you a sense from a search experience. This is also providing these deals and bargains, because in the store, they're merchandising, and this is all search-driven. It's different elements, but now automatically sorted by discount. And it gives you a sense, really, of the experience working as a store owner. It's been very successful because they can concentrate on what the customer is doing, and for the first time, they actually flip it around and show people that experience. What's behind the hood is SharePoint 2013 and the BA Insight user experience engine. So those controls, I'm going to select the ability to go from grid to list. None of that's out of the box. And doing that as a custom search project is an enormous amount of work. And they were able to use these controls to provide a tailored experience. The type ahead, query history, there are pre-built controls such as these graphical refiners that let you pick in. In many cases, you've got lots of different elements in the metadata, and you want to search inside or pick them, or you're working within a taxonomy, a tree control, if you will, and that's all pre-built, as is the ability to export result sets, et cetera, et cetera. So it gives you a sense of using a set of controls as a palette to build this kind of, really compelling search experience at the same time as staying within the SharePoint 2013 paradigm. If you know how to use display templates, anybody here worked with search display templates? Couple. So if you know how to use that, you know how to use this. Fits directly into that. Also, under the hood, they used a technique from our dynamic query and result transformations. Remember I showed you stock levels. Those are coming in real time from an SAP system in the back end. So as the search results are coming back, here's the cordless drills I'm interested in. A bulk goes back to SAP. What's the inventory levels for this store and all stores? From the UI perspective, that just shows up as a managed property. It's seamless. They also use this to fix up some very specific linguistics. I'm looking for painting supplies, and I want to get the same thing for paint, painter, tape. That doesn't work out of the box. Stemming, synonym expansion, spell checking are all done in what I'd say least common denominator independently. So if you want that kind of control, you use this kind of approach. Where under the hood, you can control the queries and the result any way you want. And the net result is a compelling user experience for this kind of application, which is specific to product search, yes, but a pattern about creating a really strong user experience.
Yep. So that really brings me to the second pattern. And the pattern really is about finding a tailored search-driven application. How do you field a tailored search-driven application? Now, Apache is an amazing organization.
Anybody here from Apache right now? Okay, I know that they're here and they're great to talk to if you have a chance to.
Yeah. So they are a global organization. They have offices in Houston, but literally their stretch is really global. They have people all around the world. So they have people in Argentina, Australia, Egypt, UK, North Sea, and all those places. And one of the pieces that they face is, and they have people constantly involved in exploration. And as the person, and so you can imagine all these different sites that they have, and people exploring for, and really exploring for oil. And the challenge that they face is, now I found oil. Eureka.
Eureka. I actually found oil in my backyard last week. It was neat. What these guys taught me, and us, was that the oil business is an information business. And this is a pretty specific application, one of many within Apache, but it's for the people who are looking at land rates. Yep. Here's a lease. Pretty complex, deep documents with lots of legal terms in it. And that lease really matters a lot for both exploration and then extraction.
Without a doubt. And the biggest challenge that they had along the way was that the information was in these systems, but it was really hard for a user to go and try to get to that information. So the site has the exploration, they've now found it, now they need to understand this piece really, really in an in-depth manner. So really what they were looking to do is really develop a 360-degree view of the lease itself. So the core challenge that they faced was because they had all of this information. The information really existed there. The challenge that they faced was, how do we deliver an effective search-driven experience around this? And really, and from our platform perspective, they really focused very heavily upon the user experience metadata, the user experience piece. And that's really a very powerful piece across this.
Yeah, and let me show you what it looks like. So we talked about ACE, and that being a very tailored user experience. So is this. The difference being that this is done much more rapidly. This is a much more focused application for inside the firewall. Therefore, it doesn't have this sort of glitzy e-commerce feel, but it's very dense in information. The leases are jam-packed, and these refiners on the left use all the available metadata, often in terms, that are gobbledygook to me. But to the leaseholding people their codes. BOS 1235C, it's like, absolutely. Having a thumbnail helped them a lot because it gave them instant recognition, and having that be something intelligent that brought them to the right page, big win for these guys. In addition, this metadata and presenting that as a very rich experience was really important. So this is a pretty traditional keyword search kind of application, but it's tailored. No custom code, just assembly of things. And once you have found the leases that you're looking for, in fact, the data is coming from 2 main systems, and previously they told me that they were tearing their hair out because they kind of get really deep in a lease, find specific items, pull out that metadata, go to another system, find it, cross-correlate it, and is very error-prone, in fact, not just labor-intensive.
Yep.
You have this sort of interactive workspace. I can't show you their system, but let me show you sort of a demo system I've got running here that's the same technology. Right? On the left, we've talked about these metadata-driven pre-built controls, and I'm going to go through and look at each of these documents in a smart preview. And I hope you can read this. I'm adding to a workspace. So the first 2 documents I just did were, yep, those were interesting. Then this one, I want to add that to the workspace too. This one actually, I'm actually going to open it and save it locally. And once I have gone through that, I can explore, continue the experience. I have a control here, and this is HTML5 workspace, so has a nice, works on an iPad, et cetera. I can keep that experience going and search inside. Everything that I've selected during this, I've added to this workspace. So I have 3 things. I can go from there and create a new document or a new PowerPoint, et cetera. So this workspace is a big win. Let me go back here. It's part of, again, the BA Insight software stack. It's part of the user experience engine. And the idea is just to remember tagged content as you're going through. These lease investigations were 2 days on average. So there's a lot of different information you're looking at across systems, but then creating a composite document, like automating cut and paste was a big win, and exporting and sharing those made collaboration a lot easier. So just a reminder, that a piece, the workspace and content assembly, along with the previews, the exploration controls, and these query result transformations I talked about for ACE are all part of this user experience engine. And the idea is that you'll use them in combination, that no particular experience is exactly the same. Apache is different than ACE. But they're both built from the same palette, if you will.
So that really leads me into what I'll call pattern 3.
Pattern 3, wow.
And pattern 3 really is a challenge that most organizations face. And the challenge is they have multiple source systems, but they also want to deliver multiple applications on top of those source systems. Now, DLA Piper is an amazingly large law firm. It's 8,000 lawyers all around the globe. They have offices in the US, Asia, Europe, Middle East. They are massive. 77 offices, 31 countries. They understand this.
Yeah, by the way, just after this session, if you're interested more in this particular case study, I'll be, as part of another session, doing an in-depth case study of DLA Piper. So those folks that want to go more depth, we can continue after this. I also want to mention, this is an audience interactive thing. You can ask questions, and please do, and we'll actually answer them. But we're back to DLA as an example. These guys, by the way, really impressed me at their approach. They're an organization that not only is taking advantage of being global, but keeping close to this motto, everything matters, which is very customer-centric.
Very, very, very true. And when you think about DLA Piper, and we think about the cases that they really brought up into this, it comes down to two really main pieces. Is from a challenge perspective, they were really trying to reduce the search time that their legal staff was going under. They also were in a situation where they wanted their lawyers to have access to every different client and every different matter. But more importantly than that, they also wanted to be a part of something. So they wanted to have this built upon an agile foundation, and that agile foundation would provide them the means for future developments. But the biggest challenge that they faced along the way was they have really limited IT resources within that organization. And the users within DLA Piper are completely demanding. And that demanding user is on them all the time. And on top of that, they really have a complex infrastructure on top of all that.
So that may seem like a truism, by the way, that I've never met someone that didn't feel very limited in their IT resources. But literally, even the world's largest law firm has a skeleton staff for IT, and one person responsible for managing search. So it's very possible, just you'd have to have the right approach and the right tools along with that. And these guys were smart in the way they went about it.
Yeah, and from their perspective also, they had multiple business critical systems. They had 7 key systems. They had Autonomy I Manage, they've had Elite, they have LexisNexis for interactions. They had all these different systems, but really when it came down to it, they were really trying their best to address 2 main concerns, which is they have multiple audiences and they have multiple applications across those different pieces. And when you think about the core challenge that they faced, it was really about how do you tap into these multiple content systems, and at the same time, how do I surface that information in multiple views for them?
Let me show you what this looks like. And there's a pattern here that search can look lots of different ways. In many cases, you start out with something that's very familiar. We've trained everyone about how to use keyword search and results, and that's a good starting place and often worth fielding. You see here, we've redacted things because of confidentiality, but they used a pretty familiar tab experience left to right for different views, but started over time really looking at those views more as individual applications. I'll tell you more about that. There's metadata here that comes from a legal specific set of entity extractions fielded by Thomson West. So as you're looking at content from these 7 different systems, every piece is categorized by all the lawyers that are licensed to practice, the jurisdictions, the judges, the area of law citations. So you get very extensive metadata as you're bringing this content in. And that metadata then is used for this refinement on the left. So you see that pattern over and over. So they have a fusion view, which is things from everywhere, a document management view when they're really getting into specific records, because this is pretty curated content. Yeah?
So the left column here, the metadata columns created in the document libraries, right? Is this something we can configure which one of them we want to see on the left and which one we don't want to see?
Yes. Yes, so the question to repeat is, can I control what's happening on the left? And by the way, since you asked a question, you get a present. The typical pattern is that you'll have lots of metadata fields that you then collapse into a small set of things that make sense to the user, give them good names, and then show them, control which ones you want to show. So for example, if you look at the client view, this is the same content, but now brought all around a given customer. That's what the clients are customers. Documents, who in the firm is working with them, what are the billing records and financial elements, in a view that looks a little less searchy. This looks like it's, content web parts and lists, but it's search-driven, and the same refiners show up there, but they've selected only a couple. In the matter view, they call these dashboards because it has sort of that flavor that I'm thinking about that matter, I'm going to click there, and everything about that matter is there. Again, the refiners that you use are configurable. This is part of billing information to the right because that's how am I doing on this case.
Sure.
But normally in the first few lines under the document, it shows the orders that modified by date, Can I specifically say that I want to see this whatever column that I added for the metadata to see as the first one or first row under the document?
The question is, can I control what shows up on sort of this matter, the metadata card? And the answer is yes. Right? And that's a matter of, again, configuration, not coding. How many kids do you have?
I don't have any.
All right, so you can get some kids this way. Oh, I get confused. I never learned that. So when you look at the experience from an attorney's perspective, they've got this exploration. Those choices about what shows up, where we provide intelligent defaults, and then typically an admin or a super user sets them up. If you can configure a web part, you can do this. And what you see then here is, remember I mentioned this workspace? For these attorneys, this is great because they are working on documents they call briefs. I don't know why they're called briefs because they're hundreds of pages long. The ability to take this page, this page, this page, make a new document, and reuse well-done work from one client to another makes them much more effective. So they love that particular feature. But these elements are, what you really see is the same things that we talked about for Apache and ACE in terms of a configurable user experience. What's important about this pattern is that it's powered from content that's coming from lots of different places. DLA, remember we talked about approaching it right? Our advice to them was not to do one system, then the other system, and the other system, and keep going until you have all of your content, but to pick ahead of time the essential systems that everyone uses all the time and field them together all at once. And that worked well because users didn't have an experience where they were seeing 5/7 of the answer, then the next month 6/7 of the answer. They had it all together at once. And this is powered by this content connectivity engine. It's pre-built connectors for lots of different systems that then work with a very sophisticated security mechanism. A lot of these systems, I was talking to someone here that's using our Documentum connector, and it's notoriously difficult from a security mapping perspective because, frankly, Documentum is much more sophisticated than SharePoint in its security model. And when you need to map that together, that's one of the areas that we excel at. And then that content can be processed, metadata added. In DLA's case, this entity extraction is done through a web service interface to WestKM, and then put into a single index. Since they have these multiple sources and very limited IT resources, the administration of that is important. Anybody here ever done crawl metadata mapping? Okay, was it fun? I do it on Friday nights. Yeah, it's a party to do this. And if you're working in content out of the box in SharePoint, some of this is done automatically for you. But anything outside of SharePoint, and for DLA, they have 70 million documents, and 7 million of them are in SharePoint. Doing this for external content is a drag. It's very laborious, and what we've done is automate that, and also created a test bench which lets you see, oh, is this right? Is the security right? Is the latency such that I'm going to get good throughput or not before you put stuff into a search index? Because once you put it into a search index, it's actually pretty hard to get it out. So that gives you a flavor of the content connectivity engine, which is really a factor that helped them not just succeed in building, but succeed in operating this system, which remember is working on hundreds of offices all over the place. So they got enough problems just with the connectivity and the easier we can make their administration, the better. And that's the pattern really about multiple content sources to multiple applications, because they've come to view the matter view, the client view, the content view as really separate places. People know to go to those for what the job they're trying to get done.
That's great. This brings me to what I think is probably one of the most challenging patterns. And it's fighting information chaos.
Information chaos sounds ominous.
It's very ominous.
I like chaos.
Then you're the only one.
I guess I create chaos.
So this is a global energy company. They're based in Houston, Texas. They're really about how do I explore for resources, how do I produce and do all that stuff around the resources.
And I remember I was meeting with these guys earlier today, and they said, we're not an oil company, we're an information company.
And that's very, very true. And when you think about the challenges that they had, the challenges that they faced were that across all of their content, they had either missing or poor metadata. And on top of that, they had duplicate documents, they had information in silos, they had repositories with unknown content. Basically, when it finally came down to it, nobody could find anything.
Is this familiar to anyone? Raise your hand if you've experienced this problem. I haven't. You have not? No, I get no hair. Wow.
Oh, man.
This is probably the most common pattern of you walk in and I've got a headache, nobody can find anything, and part of it is that you have to attend to your content. Now, I have a philosophy about this, which is maybe a little left-leaning, if you will, which is that content really needs to be free. There's a balance always between compliance, control, and this content sprawl. But the more you try to cage this stuff, the more you put in controls, when it gets to a certain point, people just go around it. If you make them tag things, they won't. And you'll end up with a sprawl of junk no matter what. So making the content free, meaning you're not predetermining how people are using it, you're letting it go where people want it to go, and giving it, if you will, loose control. I don't mean free like beer, because in my experience, free beer is bad beer. But free in the sense of Freebird. And the irony is that achieving this kind of flexibility happens when you add structure. And I'm talking about metadata. That by adding metadata, you can really get at all kinds of ways that this content is going to be used. The issue is that metadata is expensive, error-prone, people don't tag things. And trying to use social tagging and the wisdom of crowds doesn't work well inside the enterprise. Again, it's got to be people's behavior, and the real breakthrough here is the fact that you can make metadata by machine.
No way.
Yes way. You've been in search a long time. This isn't a radical idea. The idea of from text analytics of making metadata by machine exists in the search engine you have. How many people here are using SharePoint 2013? Okay, or fast search for SharePoint? Okay. Both of those have a form of entity extraction built in. You can give it a list and say, recognize this word if it shows up in the document, and voila, you've got metadata. We've taken that idea to a whole nother level. Because SharePoint has what's called a term store, or MMS, Managed Metadata Store, built into it. We use that, and anything that you define as a managed term set, you can associate with documents, with list items, et cetera, by running the content intelligence engine over it. And therefore, both things that say, if the title has this kind of thing in it, put it with this tag on it. Things that say, here's company's expertise, types of roles, project names, product names you can associate. Often this gets into a hierarchy that you have a product name within one product line and a similar one in a different product line. They won't appear together in the text, so you need something that looks at the hierarchy. Or you have regular expressions and you're looking for PII, personal identification information. You get the idea that there's lots of ways that machines can find this metadata, and when you do that, you get consistent metadata, and that is the structure to set content free. These guys, there's actually literally a screenshot, remember, told me, oh, well, I have 4 kinds of metadata that I can depend on. I always have the file name, I've always got the author, I've got the created date, and I've got the file size and type. My problem is that 3 of those 4 is usually wrong. The title is not that useful. The date is when the content was migrated, not when it was actually modified or created. The author is whoever created the template. So I only have one piece of metadata, which is how big is this file, that I can depend upon. And that's really sucks. So you go into their document libraries, you see this, and it's sort of like, oh, I love it, Mike, you did this. Look, Mom, no metadata. And that's one of the main issues in this information chaos. I have a whole spiel about how to create file names and set those up for findability, and the reality is people will not do that. Yeah?
Yes.
So you do want some governance, you do want to use content types, you want to do the best you can, but this technique of annotating and then creating some metadata by machine is a big win. So you've defined content types, people aren't using them, run the machine over it, it'll tell you what the content type should be, and then you can use things like the content organizer to fix things up. And running this annotation, which you can do in the background, you can do it on an upload basis, you can do it on demand, gives you what you see on the right here, which is pretty rich metadata from the managed metadata store. And that's useful right in place, it's useful for compliance, it's also, of course, useful for findability and search. Managing this, again, remember the administrative side of this is as important as the build side, because running search is a continual process. It's very organic. This is sort of what you see as an administrator. You have a taxonomy manager on the left. You can see a set of rules. You can test those rules, much like I talked about with the content connection engine, and see what's going on, and then set it free for the machine to run. And when you have that metadata, it's useful immediately in both search, refinement, sorting, and shows up in the UI in this way. So you have a sense of, for this large energy company, how they dealt with information sprawl through automated tagging. We do have, again, a philosophy here of using a rules-based engine as opposed to machine learning, for example, because in our experience, that control is really important. You can tell what the machine is doing, you can debug it, you can test it, and it's administratable by mere mortals. The way that we then generate the rules to keep it so that there's a low administrative overhead is intelligent default. So this company had one group that was really into this. They developed deep taxonomies, they knew all about structures and metadata, and they wanted deep, deep control, and they could do it. But they had 12 other groups that had no real mandate or time to create that crafted kind of taxonomy and metadata, and they could get going quickly and do a good enough job using this kind of technology. So that's the pattern around content chaos.
So that really
Oh, yeah, question. Yeah, so the question is, if I have content type structure and a taxonomy, can I use it? And the answer is absolutely. You're ahead of the game. If you have anything you have, you should use, because you've spent time developing it as part of your information architecture. Yes, so a common pattern is to have a drop-off library for publishing. Have that drop-off library with a form that requires people to put not 10 pieces of tags, but 2, then have the machine populate another 40 and have someone say yes. So that gives you a sense of did you get a second one?
Yeah.
You want another?
Nope.
You got 2?
Nope.
Good.
Good.
How many kids do you have?
Boy, we're giving away these for the wrong reason. So I want to talk about another pattern.
Wait, there's another question.
Oh,
So if, how do you apply these rules in where you do that?
There are 2 modes here. One is what's called in place. My content's in SharePoint. Therefore, it's really easy to make additional managed metadata columns. I can use PowerShell to create additional ones. Then I got a place to hold the metadata. And then you just go. The other one is during indexing, because the content is coming from some other system. It's not so easy to go create a place to write stuff back. The machine now, instead of making content in managed metadata columns, puts it in what are called managed properties, and it shows up only in the search index. And you can use it for findability. So it doesn't matter where the content comes from. So it's in place or during indexing.
so while Jeff is tossing away our valuable resources, I'll talk about another one about the patterns we see. And this one really, I can only describe it as cloud sprawl.
Cloud sprawl.
Sprawl.
That sounds like a dance.
I'll get you back to that. So, and this one's near and dear to my heart because I just turned 50.
I'm 3 years ahead of you.
Uh-oh.
But do you know 50 is the new 30?
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. So the challenge with these people was that there was a lot of people over 50. And really, across that list, it was 37 million current members. And really what they were trying to do was trying to be an advocate for multiple things. So they were acting as an advocate for public policy issues, healthcare and financial security issues. They wanted to promote community service, as well as being able to publish and work with business partners and offer products and services across that. The challenge that they faced was really serious, that they had multiple different pieces across there. So they had some systems that had Dropbox and Box and SugarSync. They had other systems that had Huddle and Basecamp, eFile. There were Google Docs, SkyDrive Pro, you name it. It was all over the place.
Now I understand what you mean by cloud sprawl. Mike is sneaking things in here on me, these terms. And this looks like plain old sprawl and plain old lack of governance. But these are all things that typically come in because people are going around IT.
Yep.
That it's easy to adopt Dropbox and Box as an individual, as a department, especially because it's in the cloud. It looks like they have a whole bunch of these things.
Yeah, I mean, it continues on and on. I mean, it goes through Yammer and it goes through all sorts of pieces. But to top it all off, it's even more of a challenge. So when a user searches for a particular piece of content, unless there is a very specific piece of information that was a part of it, they're not finding anything.
Oh. Does anybody here have this kind of cloud sprawl where Box and Dropbox and multiple different kinds of things are sort of sneaking in? A lot of nodded heads. And that's we could use the pattern that we talked about before about let's make a connector for each of these and run it, but it's really something you want to do in a more direct way. And working with these guys, remember the theme here is about not being in this trap of let's just cycle the search technology. Let's look at this project from an intelligent position. This actually, the right thing for these guys to do was to migrate content and to consolidate platforms. So as part of an initiative of getting findability, they did all of these things. They put in a way to do better capture. They migrated from Box and Dropbox and Huddle onto, what was it, the time called SkyDrive, before Microsoft changed the names to confuse us. But they added in unification through search, a data enhancement process, the same thing we just talked about in the oil company with classification against taxonomy, and information architecture design. So as part of a project to really get at the symptom, the headache of people can't find anything, now it's consolidating, not down to one, but they ended up with really 3 main on-premise repositories and 2 cloud repositories, one of which was Salesforce and one of which is Office 365, including OneDrive. And using the connectors, the content connectivity engine I talked about, to bring that into a single index. And the what I call public information sources, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, they didn't touch. Like, let's leave that for a second phase. It's a bigger thing to wrestle with, but it's part of the same vision about providing a coherent findability through lots of sources that are in the cloud. And this combines some of the capabilities we've talked about in the previous patterns. Bringing information together from multiple sources through the content connectivity engine into something that did classification. Remember I talked about classifying during indexing into a unified index. What's a little bit different here is that 2 of the connectors are against cloud sources. They're multi-tenant. They have quotas against them. They're slightly trickier. And those are connectors that BA Insight supplied, both for Salesforce and crawling Office 365 from on-prem. At one level, it's just like any other system. At another level, you're interacting with a SaaS platform that has a specific SLA and a multi-tenant characteristic so that there's some extra tricks to it. And this, in combination with consolidation, helped them a lot. In fact, they ended up using search as a way of detecting which things they wanted to consolidate. So a very nice pattern. I didn't know to call it cloud sprawl, but I like that.
That gets me to the last of the patterns. This pattern really is challenging. And I'm not even quite sure if you'll be able to come up with anything for this one, because this is really, really challenging.
Oh, you're scaring me.
And
yes,
it really,
question.
Do you know where that diagram comes from?
No, I have no idea where that diagram comes from, Ed. But it's not. It's actually this is an illustrative diagram. We're actually not talking about the case study that comes from this diagram, but Ed is talking about a case study for Ernst & Young tomorrow morning. So I'd suggest you definitely go to his session.
so back to this.
Oh, yeah.
Whoops, excuse me.
You know you're going to ask a question.
So the challenges that exist within this organization, and we'll just call it whatever for now, is that they are a global infrastructure. But the challenge that they have is they have, even just think of it this way, they have 21 subsidiaries plus their corporate. And each one of them with a local set of parameters. So the client could be unique to it. There's infrastructure pieces, there are regulation pieces, there are control pieces.
So what you're saying is that residency, this security isn't about whether things are encrypted or not. It's literally where is the information within a country, and can it be like grabbed by the bad guys or the government?
So this is really about how do you create a global infrastructure, but at the same time provide for the residencies about that infrastructure. Now, the challenge about this is there's all sorts of data residency pieces. So there are compliance pieces around that. There are all sorts of pieces around how to deal with that. And this is really, really complex. And the most important piece around this is the complexity of it.
Yeah, so this is, before this, we talked about Mike's going to basically see if I can come up with solutions for this, which is kind of silly because these are already solved problems. But this pattern is all over the place. Anybody here have sort of this global enterprise with distinct control? You have sort of what I call the global local. I'm trying to get at my local control information plus the corporate stuff. But it gets even more convoluted than that because often you have patterns where there's 3 or 4 different sources. In this case, they wanted to use the cloud as much as they could for extranets. There's no barrier for the kind of information they were putting for each subsidiary into Office 365. But a lot of the intranet stuff they determined had highly sensitive data they didn't want to do. So it's not something that we could use this crawl pattern for. It requires another technique. And ultimately, it was a combination of these techniques that made this sort of colossus work. The combination of the crawling pattern that we showed a minute ago from the other pattern, and a technique called federation, in which you take the same query, you send it to multiple places, and you bring it back. And it turned out that where the index was mattered, but as long as you have permission to get answers, a list of results with snippets for them had no issues with data residency. The issue there was just about security. And we've got security locked down very, very nicely with this. So SharePoint 2013 has a built-in mechanism for search federation called remote result sources that is that's quite nice. And we're very excited when it was released. BA Insight uses that to provide a single result set, either across the cloud and on-prem, across multiple farms, across 2010, 2013. We call this multi-search. And the basic idea is you get, unlike sort of an out-of-the-box pattern with 2013 where you have what are called result blocks. I have everything from the cloud, everything from on-prem, and then if I have 5 of these, I've got 5 result blocks, and it takes about 1.5 before I get to the second page. We combine them into a single result set based upon the relevancy scores that we get from each of the individual search engines. We also combine the refiners. Rather than out of the box, you only get refiners from the local source and stuff from the remote source you don't get at all. It's a tricky problem, but we've found a way to do that so that they're added together. And we add even metadata on the fly into that so that if you want to select this is this country or this subsidiary or global or local, the user has control over it. That's called multi-search. And the combination of this pattern, multi-search, and indexing was what was needed to solve this global problem.
Wow.
So you thought that we wouldn't be able to do this, actually.
No way.
Okay, so it's kind of neat. Let's recap. We've talked about 6 different patterns that sort of coalesce about having a tailored user experience. And tailored specifically fits within these patterns. These are not full custom code. These are not really heavy projects, but they're definitely not out of the box. And by recognizing that search is not one size fits all, it's tailored experiences for people trying to get specific jobs done, that's probably the #1 success pattern. If you start from that standpoint, then you can both get a mandate for a search project because your management knows this is the result. not some nebulous, I'm going to make the intranet better. But you can also make the results better because that context of what job people are trying to get done and who they are is gold in terms of making a good search experience. We talked about the pattern of multiple sources because no one keeps all of their information in SharePoint. In fact, these content sources sprawl like weeds. And using connectors or federation to get at all of these sources and then fielding it in multiple applications is really powerful. You don't have to prepare the data differently for each application, but you do have to present it differently for each application.
Yep.
And last but not least, fighting this information chaos is a noble, never-ending battle. And our advice or approach is not to get too rigid, but to use metadata, and specifically machine-generated metadata, to provide enough structure that people can find what they need to. And we've illustrated, actually, these patterns show up, all of these in every customer, but you saw in ACE and Apache tailored user experiences. You saw several cases where we're using machine-built metadata and multiple applications. And these all come from the knowledge integration platform. This is the BA Insight software that has really a set of software for connectivity. That's what gets you at multiple sources. Set of software for content intelligence, enrichment, metadata generation, and a set of software for presentation. We don't make a search engine. You already have a search engine. What we do is make it possible for you to succeed with search by providing these elements that show up in these successful patterns that you would otherwise have to make yourself or collect from lots of different places. So that's the flavor of it. Please, if you want to know more, stay after this session, grab someone here who's already a customer, come to our booth. Right after this session, I'll be talking about DLA specifically as part of another session. And you can also go back and look at some of the things that we've presented over the last couple of days. Now, we have a few minutes left, maybe 7 minutes. So it's time for questions, and we're going to switch into what I call Stump the Chump mode, which is not just that you'll get a fabulous toy for the kid you don't have, but if you're able to ask a question that neither of us know an answer to, you'll get a prize, a Beatbox headphones, a search book, or something of that value of your choosing. You can, tell us you want a Ferrari. That probably won't qualify. So any questions?
Uh-oh. Over there.
Yeah.
Yes.
We definitely see that in the future. I think that just like the boundaries between search and navigation, right, they should be all of a piece. Social and findability should all be of a piece. And I think you saw at this conference the unveiling of Project Oslo as an example of that. Pragmatically, today we work with that through connectors for these different systems, for Jive, for Chatter, and bringing those together in the connectivity pattern. But it's today, it's another example of content that you can bring into a unified view, but where we're going is much deeper than that. Other questions? Oops, oh, sorry. I'm glad we were going to provide things that actually are hard and not soft. I'm glad we didn't. Ed?
Yes.
That's a good question. So this thing that we call the user experience engine has pre-built, we're using the same display template engine, but we're adding several things. pre-built components that use that same display template. So if you want to modify it, you can. And things that go a lot deeper. For example, in the exploration controls, you want things that are sort of reactive, that they paint as you go. And we're able to send to the search engine a query and ask for no results and get a really quick response that's used only for updating that refiner experience without anything else. Or the workspace that I showed is packaged as a web part that you can put anywhere and a pop-up that you can put in a hover panel. You can customize it if you know how to use display templates, but it's its own control. It has persistence, so you know which pieces you've got. It does this document assembly, so it's much deeper. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Yes.
We have application as everybody else, and also we are, I mean, the defense industry, so there's a lot of rules about who's got access support.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to take everything and init it on the same server so we can see everything. Right now, we have if the product is in SharePoint, you can search on SharePoint. But if the product is in an email, you have to go to an email search.
Mm-hmm.
How can I be sure that if I index up everything, there are the permissions are in place?
So this is a longer discussion, but you haven't stumped us. The question, to repeat it, is high security environment, but centralized index. How can I ensure security? And there's an element that is, how do I make sure that people only see the results that they want? And that's called security trimming. Based upon your authentication, you only see things that you have permission to read. There's another element that says, I got a data structure here in a search index that if somebody were able to grab it and look at it, could they read it and see things they're not entitled to? And in most security reviews, that passes a security review because looking at the search index is gobbledygook. You can't reconstruct a document from the search index. You have a reference pointers. There are cases where, for extremely paranoid people, you have to use more sophisticated techniques. It's ultimately doable, but it does make the project more complex. Ed?
The question showed some interesting interactions with content. I'm wondering how that works in an Office 365 multi-tenant scenario.
Okay, so we're going to throw something that's hard now because we're out of the soft things.
Whoa!
The question is, what about multi-tenant? What works in Office 365 and what doesn't? And for BA Insight today, this is still, like I think most organizations, it's an evolving target, right? Ultimately, everything that can work in the SharePoint app model will. Today, creating metadata and working with that is a good start. We're able to work with stuff, with content that's in S by crawling it. So you want to enrich and have a unified index. Our answer today is to enrich things because Office 365 doesn't allow you to crawl external content, doesn't allow you to enrich it. If you want to do that, you crawl it to an on-prem external instance. And then the last hook that works today is this federation technique that I want to federate in and out of Office 365. Any other questions?
Questions? Yes.
Yeah, so the question is about relevance optimization. Does B-Insight provide relevance optimization techniques and technologies? And I'll say the short answer is we try to help you use whatever's built into the native platform. And SharePoint 2013 has some nice relevancy control. There's a new tool out which is not for the faint of heart, but it's called the Relevancy Optimizer tool, and our services guys use exactly that. That's a tool from Microsoft that we do recommend. We also add in elements. So, for example, this user experience engine changes ranking and gives you control over ranking by using a construct called XRank. Right? That doesn't work in SharePoint 2010, but does in 2013 and faster for SharePoint. And then we use that to make sure that you've got a good relevance. So it's a bit of a longer answer, which is when you want to get really deep, and this is, I think you'll find that with us in general, we want people to be able to use the techniques supported and provided by Microsoft to do whatever they need to do. But we'll fit into that and mean so that we'll do it for you for stuff that's out of the box from us. And then when you get into, beyond tailored into customized, we've accelerated your project. We've made things much safer, but you still can go tweak things the way that you're trained to when you go to TechNet. There's a way to do it, yeah. When you get into relevance optimization, it's one of the things that's really poorly understood about search generally. Don't try this at home. It's just, there's no right answer. What's relevant to you and to me are different.
That's actually my talk tomorrow morning at 9 on relevance. So I'm not going to get into the details on 2013, but I'm going to talk a little bit about how to take an objective, I think. Sorry for stealing it.
No, no problem.
We're at the end of the time slot, a little bit over. Please stay, ask more questions. Thank you guys very much for coming. And don't forget to put in evaluations. And don't forget to come to the booth and try to stump the chumps.
Thank you.